How can a single day destroy a man's life so completely? How do you go from husband, father, and loyal employee to unwanted, erased, and alone in a diner at 11 p.m.? And why did a stranger look at me like he was seeing a ghost of the son he lost decades ago? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Mark Fallon, and I can tell you the exact day my life fell apart. It started with burned toast and cold coffee and ended with me sitting in a diner across from a stranger who looked at me like I was a ghost. That morning, I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the toaster like it had personally betrayed me. The bread came out black on one side and barely warm on the other. I scraped it over the sink and watched crumbs fall into the drain. Lauren walked in behind me, her heels already on, her hair and makeup perfect like always. She glanced at the mess on the counter and sighed in that slow way she did when she wanted me to feel small. She said she wished, just once, I could manage breakfast without making a disaster. I told her I would clean it up. She ignored that and started talking about bills instead. She waved the electric bill in my face and said it was late again and asked if I had any idea how that made us look. I said I had it handled and that the payment was scheduled. She said those words did not mean much coming from a man who was always on the edge of being replaced. I felt that one land in my chest, but I did not argue. Ben and Nora were sitting at the table, eating cereal in silence. Nora kept her eyes on her bowl. Ben watched us with that tight little face kids get when they understand more than you want them to. I told the kids I would drive them to school. Lauren said there was no need because she had already arranged it with a neighbor. She said the neighbor was more reliable than someone who could not even remember recital times. I opened my mouth to reply, then closed it again. There was no point. I grabbed my work bag, kissed the top of Ben's head, told Nora to have a good day. She gave me a quick look that was half smile, half worry. On the drive to the warehouse, I tried to tell myself it was just stress. The numbers, the mortgage, the kids, the market. People said stuff they did not mean when they were tired. I had been telling myself that for almost 3 years. I worked as a senior logistics coordinator at a regional distribution center. That was the fancy title. What I really did was make sure trucks showed up where they needed to be, when they needed to be there, with the right things inside. I knew every dock, every driver, every shortcut between our place and the interstate. I had been there almost 15 years. I had trained half the people on the floor. 3 months earlier, they had brought in a new operations director. His name was Gavin Reed, 38, sharp haircut, perfect teeth, expensive watch. He had come from some big consulting firm and liked to talk about disruption and efficiency. He shook my hand on his first day and told me he was excited to modernize the way we did things. He called me buddy 3 times in one sentence. By the time I parked that morning, my chest already felt tight. I sat in the car longer than usual, watching the big loading bays in the distance, the forklifts moving like slow yellow insects. I finally made myself get out, swipe my badge, walk in through the side door. The air inside smelled like coffee, dust, and diesel. I went straight to the small office the coordinators shared. The guys were quiet. A couple of them looked at me, then quickly looked back at their screens. That was the first sign something was wrong. Usually there was at least one joke about traffic or someone's team losing. At 9 sharp, Gavin sent a message asking everyone to gather near the main whiteboard. He stood there with a marker in his hand and a smile that did not touch his eyes. He said we were behind on our targets. He said some of the older methods were slowing the team down. He tapped a section of the board where my routing charts were pinned and said this was an example of processes that needed retirement. He did not say my name right away, but everyone knew whose system that was. I felt the eyes hit me like little pins. One of the newer coordinators shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Gavin went on and said some people had trouble adapting, and that was normal. Then he looked straight at me and said some roles would become redundant if they did not adjust. He said it with a little laugh, like it was a joke. I said nothing. I just listened. I had learned that if you spoke when you were angry, you usually made things worse. So I stood with my hands in my pockets and my face neutral while my work of years was dismissed in front of the team. When the meeting ended, people drifted away quickly. One guy clapped me on the shoulder on his way past and said he was sure it would blow over. His eyes said the opposite. At 10, I got an email from Gavin's assistant telling me he wanted a one-on-one right before lunch. His office did not match the rest of the building. Glass walls, new carpet, a big metal desk with nothing on it but a laptop and a pen holder. He told me to sit. He leaned back in his chair and said this would not be easy. He told me corporate had been reviewing numbers, and my position was no longer sustainable. He called me an expensive legacy resource. Then he stopped pretending and said I was an expensive burden for the company. I asked if there had been issues with my performance. My voice stayed even. He said it was not about performance, it was about strategy. He said they could hire 2 junior coordinators for what they paid me. He said he was sure I would understand, since I seemed like a reasonable guy. Then he said HR had already prepared the paperwork. I sat there and listened. I thought about the nights I had stayed late rerouting trucks after snowstorms, the weekends I had worked during holiday rush, the times I had gone out to the docks myself to fix mistakes. I thought about the years of doing things right simply because it was the right thing to do, not because anyone would notice. None of that mattered in that room. I told him I understood. I did not thank him for the opportunity. He looked annoyed by that. He said security would need my badge. He said it was nothing personal. They walked me back to my office while I carried my own box. A photo of the kids at the beach, a coffee mug Nora had decorated with paint, a stack of old notebooks. My team kept their heads down. Jennifer, the scheduling assistant, met my eyes for a second. She mouthed that she was sorry. That hurt more than anything Gavin had said. Outside in the parking lot, winter air hit me hard. I put the box in the passenger seat and sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at the building. I kept expecting to wake up. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Lauren asking if I had remembered to pay for the kids' after-school program. Another message came right after, asking why the bank balance looked low. There was no, "How's your day?" or "Are you okay?" Just numbers and blame. I typed that we would talk at home and then deleted it. I put the phone face down on the seat and started the engine. On the drive back, my head felt full of static. I tried to plan what I would say, that we would be okay, that I had savings, that I could find another job. I pictured Lauren nodding, taking my hand, saying they would tighten their belts together. But the image did not ring true, and deep down, I knew why. This was not the first time I had given more than I had, and gotten cold silence in return. When I walked into the house, the first thing I saw was a suitcase standing upright by the stairs. Lauren was in the living room with her arms crossed. The TV was off. The kids were nowhere in sight. She did not ask why I was home early. She already knew something had happened. She said she had gotten a call from the neighbor who worked at the warehouse. She said the neighbor had mentioned a box and security. She asked if I had lost my job. I said I had been let go in a restructuring. I tried to explain. She cut me off with a sharp laugh. She said this was so typical. She said she had known this would happen because I never pushed for promotions, because I was too soft, too quiet, too comfortable. I told her I would find something else. I said it might even be a chance to do better. She did not even pretend to consider that. She said she was tired of carrying a man who could not protect his own position. She said I was worthless. Then she said the words that changed everything. She said she was taking the kids and that I would not drag them down with me. For a second, the room spun. I heard the blood in my ears. I asked where the kids were. She said they were upstairs packing some things. She said they would stay at her sister's for a while until she decided what to do. She said it like she was describing the weather. I looked at the suitcase again. It was the one she used for trips with her friends, the one with the little gold initials on the handle. It stood there between us like a third person. I wanted to shout. I wanted to ask her how all the years of shifts and late nights and PTA meetings and fixing broken sinks added up to worthless. But nothing came out. My throat felt tight and dry. Instead, I picked up my car keys from the bowl by the door. I said I needed some air. She told me that was fine, that maybe some distance would help me see reality. She turned away and picked up her phone, already done with the conversation. Outside, the sky was starting to darken. It was not even 5 yet, but winter days end early. I walked without knowing where I was going. Past the neighbors' houses, past the corner where Nora used to ride her bike. I kept my hands in my pockets and my eyes on the pavement. At some point, my feet carried me downtown. The streets were crowded with people heading home, talking, laughing, carrying bags. I felt like a ghost moving through them. I saw a small diner on the corner I had never noticed before. The sign buzzed softly, flickering between letters. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside. I went in because I did not know what else to do. The bell over the door jingled. The place smelled like coffee and frying onions. There were a few people in booths, a couple at the counter, a waitress wiping down menus. She nodded at me and told me to sit wherever I liked, in that automatic way people in diners speak. I chose a booth near the back and slid in. The vinyl seat squeaked under my weight. She brought me coffee without asking and asked if I wanted a menu. I said the coffee was fine for now. My voice sounded far away. I wrapped my hands around the mug, even though it was too hot, and watched little patterns of steam rise and fade. I was staring at nothing when I felt a shadow fall across the table. Someone cleared his throat gently. An older man slid into the seat across from me like we had agreed to meet. He had a worn coat, a face full of lines, and eyes that were strangely sharp. He studied my face for a long moment. Then he said he was sorry to bother me, but I looked exactly like his son. He added that his son had been missing for 35 years. The old man's words hung between us in that little diner booth. He said again that I looked exactly like his son. He said his son had disappeared 35 years ago and that he had never found him, never buried him, never heard a word. His eyes were searching my face like he expected it to change into the boy he remembered. I told him my name. I told him I was sorry. He nodded and said it was strange how life put certain faces in front of you on certain days. Then he asked what kind of day I was having. I opened my mouth to say something simple. I almost said busy or long. The kind of answer you give a stranger so they will nod and turn back to their own thoughts. Instead, the whole day came rushing up, and behind it came all the days that had led to this one. It felt like the thread had finally snapped, and everything I had been holding in started to fall out. I told him it had been coming for a while. I met Lauren when I was 27. Back then, I still had hair and a jawline and believed that hard work would solve anything. She was working at a small real estate office, answering phones and showing rentals. I met her because I was delivering a package to a property management company next door. She came out to smoke, saw me struggling with a heavy box on the steps, and made a joke about men and directions. I laughed. She laughed. That was it. We went for drinks the next week. She was sharp and funny. She said she liked that I was steady, that I did not act like the loud guys at the bar. She said she had dated too many boys who loved big plans and hated real responsibility. When she found out I worked in logistics, she said it made sense. She said she needed someone who could keep things running smoothly. Looking back, that should have been a hint. In the early years, we were a team. I picked up extra hours so she could go back to school and get her license. I drove her around on weekends, holding a stack of flyers while she showed houses, cheering her on when she closed a deal. She would fall asleep on the couch with her head in my lap, saying she was proud of how hard I worked. I believed her. I believed we were building something together. Things shifted after the kids were born, not overnight, more like a slow change in gravity that you do not feel until you look up and realize everything has moved. When Nora arrived, I took every overtime shift I could get. Diapers, formula, doctor visits, it all added up. I barely slept, but I told myself it was worth it. At first, Lauren thanked me. She would kiss my cheek, tell people at parties that I was the best dad. She liked saying that in front of other women. I could see the way they nodded, the way she soaked it in. Then her tone changed. Little things. She started saying I was never home whenever she had to handle something alone. If I missed a mommy and me class because a truck broke down on the interstate, she brought it up for weeks. She told her friends I was married to the job. At first, it sounded like a joke. Later, it did not. By the time Ben was born, she had a rhythm that did not include me. She had her mom, her sister, a circle of moms from the park. I was the man who came home late holding a lunchbox and smelling like diesel. She would hand me a baby, say she was exhausted, and go lock herself in the bedroom with her phone. I did not complain. I thought that was just how life with kids worked. The first real slap came at Nora's 3rd birthday party. We were in the tiny community hall at the church, the one with folding chairs and streamers. I had spent the previous night assembling a plastic play kitchen while Ben screamed in the next room. At the party, I tried to get the kids organized for cake, but everything was chaos. Nora's balloon popped. Another kid started crying. Someone spilled juice all over the table. I tried to lighten the mood. I said something about sugar and toddlers. Lauren rolled her eyes and said loudly that this was why she usually handled things. She said I was good at boxes and trucks, not so good with kids. People laughed, not hard, but enough. I felt my face heat up. Nora watched me from behind her paper hat, confused. Later that day, I was washing dishes in the tiny church kitchen while Lauren stood in the doorway talking to her sister. I heard her say she felt like a single mom most of the time. I heard her say she had 2 kids and 1 overgrown teenager. Her sister made a noise that sounded like sympathy. Neither of them knew I was there. My hands were in the sink. I stared at the gray water and listened. I could have walked in and said something. I could have banged plates and made them jump. Instead, I finished scrubbing the plastic cups and stacked them neatly. When they came in, I pretended I had not heard anything. That became a pattern. Work was my safe place for a long time. The warehouse made sense. Freight came in, freight went out. People needed what was on the trucks, and I helped get it to them. When someone at a construction site needed a shipment at 4 a.m., they called me. When a driver broke his ankle on ice, I covered his route myself. I knew the roads like I knew my own hands. The old operations manager, Mr. Bell, treated me like a right-hand man. He called me kid, even when I passed 40. He trusted my judgment. He once told me that if he got hit by a bus, I could run the place without missing a beat. When he retired, he shook my hand and said he had recommended me as his replacement. He said I deserved it more than anyone. I did not get the job. They gave it to someone from corporate instead, a guy who lasted 6 months. Then another one. Each time, I was told I did not quite have the profile for leadership. When I asked what that meant, they said it had nothing to do with performance. They said it was about fit and image. They never said age, but it hung in the air like a bad smell. I should have taken the hint then. The school parking lot is where I really started to see how far things had gone. One afternoon, Lauren texted that she was stuck showing a house and asked if I could pick up the kids. I left work early, rushed through traffic, and pulled into the school just as the bell rang. Nora came out with her backpack sliding off one shoulder. Ben ran straight for the monkey bars. I waved to a couple of other parents. One of the moms, a woman named Kelly, gave me a tight smile. She said she had heard I was between promotions again. It was a strange phrase. I asked what she meant. She said Lauren had mentioned that my company kept passing me over because I did not have the drive they wanted. I felt my stomach drop. I laughed it off, said something about office politics, but inside I was thinking about how many private conversations had turned into stories about me. On the way home, Nora asked why I never came to the daytime events at school. I told her I had to work. She said other dads worked too, but still came. She asked if I could just try harder. The next month, I used a vacation day to attend her class presentation. She was reading a report about space. When she spotted me at the back of the classroom, her face lit up. For those 10 minutes, it felt like everything was worth it. Afterward, though, I watched as 2 other dads chatted with the teacher, handing over business cards, talking about sponsorships and STEM programs. Lauren later said those were real career men, the kind who had made it. She told me that in a flat voice while we loaded groceries into the car. I pretended not to hear the message underneath. At home, little cuts kept coming. If the washing machine broke, I fixed it. If a pipe leaked, I was under the sink with a flashlight. When I finished, Lauren would inspect my work and say most people just called professionals. She began to speak about money like it was hers alone. When she talked about our house in front of friends, she joked that she paid the bills and I just carried boxes around. One night at a dinner party, the topic turned to retirement plans. Someone asked about savings. I mentioned that we had been careful, that I had a modest pension coming, that I had started a small education fund when Nora was born. Lauren cut in and said not to listen to me, that my idea of a financial plan was hoping the trucks keep rolling. She leaned back in her chair, laughing. The others laughed too. I smiled, because that is what you do when everyone else is laughing. When we got home, I asked why she had said that. She shrugged and said it was just a joke. She said I was too sensitive. She said I had no sense of humor about myself. Then she turned on the TV and watched a show while I stood there in the doorway. These things add up. You do not feel each one as it happens. You only realize later that you are covered in bruises. Gavin's arrival at work just pushed something that was already tipping. He was younger, but not that young, late 30s, sharp clothes. He walked through the warehouse like he owned it after 1 week. He held meetings where he spoke about legacy systems in a tone that made it clear he was talking about people as much as software. He asked me to walk him through my routing spreadsheets. I spent an hour explaining them. He nodded like he understood, then called them old-fashioned in the next team meeting. One day in the break room, I heard him talking to another manager. He said the company needed fresh blood, and that hanging on to older staff just because they were loyal was sentimental. He said a lot of people my age were coasting until retirement. I was pouring coffee around the corner. They did not see me. I stood there with my hand on the pot until the coffee overflowed onto the counter. At home, Lauren had started spending more time at her sister's place. She said they were working out together, that she was taking her health seriously. She came back from those visits with new stories about how her sister's husband had just gotten another promotion, how he was talking about investing, how he was ambitious. She did not say the word directly, but I heard it anyway. She meant someone not like me. The last family event before everything broke was at the church again, a fundraiser in the same community hall where we had celebrated Nora's 3rd birthday. There were folding tables, lukewarm coffee, a raffle. The kids ran around somewhere in the crowd. I helped set up chairs while Lauren chatted with a group near the stage. At one point, the pastor asked for a few words from people about family support. Lauren's sister stood up. She thanked her husband for always pushing himself, for being a provider. People clapped. Then Lauren raised her hand and said she wanted to speak. She talked about how hard it was when one partner carried more weight than the other. She talked about dreams being held back by people who were comfortable and afraid of change. She did not say my name, but half the room turned to look at me anyway. After the event, as we were stacking chairs, one of the older men from the church came over. He put a hand on my shoulder and said his generation had learned to accept that sometimes men just did not keep up. He said I should not feel bad if I could not give my family everything they wanted. He told me, in a kind voice, that these days everyone was replaceable. That was the first time I heard someone say out loud that I was replaceable. That was the first time I heard someone say out loud that I was replaceable. The word settled over everything like dust. It got into places I did not know were open. On the drive home from that fundraiser, Lauren talked nonstop about her sister's husband and his new promotion. I watched the road and kept hearing that older man's voice, calm and kind, saying men my age just did not keep up anymore, like it was a fact, not an opinion. Lauren asked why I was so quiet. I told her I was tired. She said I was always tired. She said maybe if I had aimed higher years ago, we would not be in this position now. I did not ask what this position meant. I already knew. From that point on, I started to notice the pattern more clearly. If the kids wanted something big, a trip, a new game system, Lauren would tell them to ask me first, then tell them in front of me that I would say no because I was cheap and scared. If a bill was late by one day, she did not ask what had happened. She announced that this was proof we lived on a knife edge because of my lack of drive. When I suggested we sit down together and go over the budget, she told me she did not want to be trapped in my small thinking. At work, Gavin's arrival made the word replaceable echo louder. He started sending emails late at night about optimization. He asked for detailed reports of my day, down to 15-minute blocks. Then he stopped inviting me to certain meetings. The new hires went in instead. When I asked if I should be there, he told me they wanted to give younger staff more exposure. He said it with a smile, like it was generous. One afternoon, I walked into the main office to drop off paperwork and saw my name on a whiteboard under a column labeled Legacy Roles. There were notes next to it I could not read from where I stood. When Gavin noticed me, he stepped in front of the board and closed the marker cap slowly. He said the board was just for planning. He said not to worry. He said things were evolving. I went back to my desk and looked at the routing charts I had built over 10 years. For the first time, they looked fragile. At home that night, Lauren was on the couch with her laptop. She did not look up when I came in. The kids ran to me, talking over each other about their day. Nora had a science test. Ben had played goalkeeper at recess. I listened, asked questions, tried to be present. When they went upstairs, Lauren closed her laptop and asked if I had thought about what would happen if I lost my job. I told her that was not exactly the welcome home I had hoped for. She ignored that. She said she had been doing some what-if math. She said, in the flat voice she used when she wanted to sound logical, that she would not let my career ceiling set a limit on the kids' future. I asked what she meant by that. She said nothing was decided yet. Then she opened her laptop again. Sometimes tiny things stick when bigger things slide past. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and could not go back to sleep. I went to the kitchen for water and noticed an old folder poking out of the drawer where we kept manuals and takeout menus. The tab said, Fallon Family, Legal. I pulled it out and set it on the counter. It was a folder I had not touched in years. Inside were copies of our house papers, old insurance forms, and a thick set of documents with my grandfather's name on them. He had passed when I was 25, leaving me a modest amount of money and something he called a family trust. Back then, I had signed what the lawyer told me to sign. I had not thought much beyond that. I was young, no kids, no house, no real sense of what a trust was supposed to do. I flipped through the pages, skimming language about beneficiaries and conditions. There was a section with my name where I was listed as trustee, and another section that mentioned minor dependents and stewardship duties. I did not read every line. The words blurred together. But one phrase caught my eye. Protection of the interests of any minor child in the event of attempted alienation or exclusion of the trustee from their life. I stared at that line for a long time in the dim kitchen light. I remembered the lawyer, a calm woman with gray hair, explaining back then that my grandfather had seen too many families fall apart over money and grudges. She had said the trust was not just money, it was structure. She had said it made sure whoever was caring for any future children would not be cut out and left with all the responsibility and none of the say. I had nodded like I understood. But I had no kids then. It felt abstract, like reading instructions for a machine I did not own yet. Now, standing alone in the kitchen, the words felt heavy. I slid the trust papers back into the folder and closed it. I did not know exactly what they meant in legal terms. I did know my grandfather had not used words lightly. The phrase, attempted alienation, stuck in my mind like a burr. The morning Gavin fired me, that word, replaceable, came back in full force. When he called me an expensive burden and said they could hire younger, cheaper people to do what I did, I heard the churchman's voice, Lauren's jokes at the dinner party, Kelly in the school parking lot repeating my wife's words. It all lined up in a straight line. It was almost funny in a sick way. The world had been telling me the same thing from different mouths, and I had been nodding along without even realizing it. Even so, when I walked out of the warehouse with my box, I still thought I could fix it at home. I thought losing the job would be the worst part of the day. I was wrong. Hearing Lauren say I was worthless and that she was taking the kids did something I had not expected. It did not make me explode. It did not make me beg. It did something quieter. It made everything go very, very clear. For years, I had been bending around everyone else's needs. At work, with the kids, with Lauren, with her family. I had told myself that was what good men did. You keep the peace, you stay calm, you take the hit so they do not have to. But standing there in our living room, facing a suitcase and a woman who looked at me like I was a broken appliance, something in me finally stopped bending. It was not anger, exactly. It was like a switch flipping from one setting to another. I realized in that moment that Lauren did not fear losing me. She expected to take everything that made my life mean something, my children, my home, my place in their story, and walk away, leaving me with the bill and the blame. She was so sure of it that she said it out loud without even lowering her voice. I thought about my grandfather, about how he used to tell me that there were two kinds of power in the world, loud power and quiet power. Loud power was shouting, threats, big gestures. Quiet power was contracts, titles, signatures. Loud power made people flinch. Quiet power changed lives. I had always assumed I had neither. Now, with Lauren's words still hanging in the air, I remembered that trust folder in the drawer. I remembered the line about alienation. I thought about how many things were still in my name. The house, the savings, the educational fund I had started when Nora was born, the one I had kept feeding even when it meant saying no to small things. I did not know exactly how those things could help me, but for the first time, I let myself wonder if I was as powerless as everyone kept telling me I was. At the diner, when the old man sat across from me and said I looked like his missing son, all that history was sitting there with me, even though I had not said any of it. He introduced himself as Henry. He said he came to that diner most evenings because his apartment felt too quiet. He said his wife had passed 10 years earlier, and his only child had disappeared long before that. He told me he had no idea if his son was alive or dead. All he had was a box of old photos and a face that haunted him in crowds. I asked when his son had gone missing. He said he had been 20. He said there had been an argument about college, about direction, about taking life seriously. He said harsh words were spoken. His son had left the house and never returned. Henry said he had spent years calling hospitals, jails, shelters. No trace. He said eventually the world told him to move on. He never had. As he talked, I watched his hands. They were rough and spotted. They shook a little when he lifted his coffee cup. His voice stayed steady, but there was a weight behind it. He said he had wasted time on pride. He said if he could go back, he would have fought harder for his son instead of trying to win the argument. Then he looked at me and asked what I was about to give up without a fight. The question hit harder than anything else that day. I told him, in simple terms, what had happened. I said I had lost my job. I said my wife had said some things. I did not repeat all of them. He did not need every detail. I said she wanted to leave and take the kids. I said she seemed sure she could shut me out of their lives if she wanted to. Henry listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back and studied me again. He said I did not look like a man who had nothing. He asked if I had ever seen a father try to find a child who had been turned against him. He said it was like trying to pull someone out of a river using whispers. I told him I did not want to fight Lauren. He nodded and said he understood. He said he had not wanted to fight his son either. He had just wanted to be right. He said being right had cost him his family. He told me that wanting peace was not the same as letting people erase you. Then he asked if I had anyone on my side. I thought of the trust folder, the lawyer from years ago, the way my grandfather always talked about planning for storms, even on sunny days. I thought of Nora's face at the school presentation when she saw me in the back of the room. I thought of Ben asking if I was moving out. I realized I had been standing alone by choice. I had never asked for help. I had never called anyone who knew how these things worked. I had assumed that losing my job meant losing every card I had left. I told Henry I did not know who was on my side, but I knew there were papers in a drawer at home that I had not taken seriously enough. I said the words slowly, testing them. He raised his eyebrows and asked if I meant legal papers. I nodded. He smiled a little then. He said papers mattered. He said signatures mattered. He said emotions came and went, but documents stayed on record. He told me he wished he had put more weight on that when he was younger. We sat in silence for a moment. The diner buzzed softly around us. Plates clinked. Someone laughed near the counter. Outside, headlights slid past the fogged windows. My phone buzzed on the table. Lauren's name was on the screen. I did not pick up. A second later, another notification appeared. It was a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. Underneath it, a third alert popped up. It was a calendar reminder I had forgotten about, one I had set long ago and never bothered to delete. It said, Annual Review, Estate and Trust, Attorney Tran. I stared at the reminder, then at the unknown number. My thumb hovered over the screen. Henry watched me and asked if everything was all right. I said I thought I needed to call someone who understood quiet power better than I did. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. The unknown number felt like a door. The calendar reminder felt like a sign I had ignored for years. Lauren's missed call sat above both of them like a warning. I took a breath, slid the phone off the table, and stood up. Henry watched me. He asked gently if he should leave me to it. I told him I needed to make a call outside. He nodded and said he would keep the booth warm in case I came back. The diner air felt heavy. Outside, the cold hit my face and cleared my head a little. I leaned against the brick wall by the door and called the unknown number first. A calm female voice answered, giving the name of a law office, then my own name, then asking if everything was all right. It took me a second to recognize the voice. Melissa Tran had helped set up my grandfather's trust years ago. Back then, she had been just another professional in a suit, walking me through forms. Now she sounded like someone calling from a different world. She said her office had a reminder to schedule annual reviews and that I had never come in, but the system still sent notifications. I told her I was sorry for not responding before. I said I thought maybe now was the time I should have. She asked if I wanted to set an appointment. I said I needed to talk as soon as possible. She went quiet for a moment, then said she could see me first thing in the morning if I was willing to come in early. I said I would be there. She asked if there was something urgent. I heard myself say the words very calmly. I said I had lost my job that day, and my wife had said she was taking the kids. There was a small pause, but her voice did not change. She said we would go over everything together. She told me to bring any paperwork I had. After I hung up, I just stood there. I did not call Lauren back. The idea of going home and walking into that same living room, that same suitcase, felt like stepping back into a burning house. Instead, I went back inside the diner and slid into the booth again. Henry looked at me, eyebrows raised. I told him I had an appointment with a lawyer in the morning. I did not give details. He gave a small nod, like a man watching someone finally stand up after a long time on the ground. We talked a little more, but not about heavy things. He told me about the best pies on the menu. I listened more than I spoke. When I finally left, he reached across the table and squeezed my forearm with surprising strength. He said that whatever happened, I should not accept being erased without a fight. He said he had already lived through that once, and it was the worst kind of loss. I walked home slowly, the cold biting through my coat. The house was dark except for a light in the living room. I stepped in quietly. The suitcase by the stairs was gone. The kids' coats were not on the hooks. Lauren sat on the couch with her phone in her hand and a tight look on her face. She asked where I had been. I told her I had needed time to think. She said she hoped I had used that time to accept reality. She explained in a calm, almost rehearsed voice that she and the kids would stay at her sister's place for a while. She said it would give everyone space. She said the kids needed stability. She said I could visit when I got myself sorted out. Then she added that with my job situation, it was probably best if she had primary control of their day-to-day life. She said she did not want them bouncing between two unstable homes. I listened without interrupting. I noticed small details instead. The way she avoided looking me in the eye when she talked about the kids. The faint smell of her sister's perfume on her jacket. The way she used the word control without noticing. When she finished, she asked if I had anything to say. I told her I had an appointment with a lawyer in the morning to talk about the trust and our situation. For the first time, something like worry flashed across her face. She asked what trust I meant. I reminded her about my grandfather's arrangement. I said I had never really looked at the details before, but now I planned to. She said in a sharp voice that dragging old money into this would only make things more complicated. She said we could handle this like adults without bringing lawyers into it. I did not answer that part. I just said I wanted to understand my responsibilities and my rights. The word rights did not sit well with her. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and said she had to pick up the kids from her sisters. She told me she would bring them back to pack more things in the next few days. She said it as if the choice had been made long ago, and my only role was to keep out of the way. When the door closed behind her, the house felt hollow. I went to the kitchen and opened the drawer with the folder. I spread the trust papers across the table. This time, I forced myself to read slowly. The language was stiff, but the meaning came through. The money was not huge, but it was not nothing. More important than the amount were the conditions. There were clauses about guardianship, about control of funds for minor children, about what happened if someone tried to push the trustee out of their lives. There was a line that said the trustee, me, was responsible for acting in the best interest of the children, not any other adult. There was another that allowed changes in how the funds were distributed if the trustee was being cut off or undermined as a parent. It was not a perfect shield, but it was not nothing. It was a piece of quiet power I had forgotten. I gathered the papers back into the folder. Then I went to my small home office and pulled out other files: mortgage statements, bank accounts, the kids' education savings records. I saw my name over and over. Co-signer here, primary account holder there. I did not feel rich or powerful. I felt like a man who had been walking around with tools he never learned to use. I stayed up late organizing everything into neat stacks. Work documents on one side, family finances on the other, the trust in its own pile. I wrote simple labels on sticky notes and placed them on the folders. I did not have a plan yet, but for the first time that day, I felt like I was doing something that might matter. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house was quiet. No kids fighting over the bathroom. No cereal bowls clinking. I made coffee, put everything into a worn briefcase I had not used in years, and drove to Melissa Tran's office downtown. The building was old brick with narrow windows. Inside, her office smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. She greeted me with a professional smile, and then a softer one when she saw my face. She asked how I was holding up. I told her the truth, that I felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under me, but I was done falling. She nodded like she had heard similar words before. We sat at a wooden table. I laid out the trust papers first. She went through them with quick, practiced eyes. As she read, she pointed at sections, explaining them in simple language. She reminded me that my grandfather had wanted to protect not just me, but any children who might come after. She said he must have known that people could be pushed aside in their own families. She explained that the trust gave me legal control over the funds meant for Nora and Ben, not Lauren, not anyone else. She said that as long as I remained trustee in good standing, I had a say in how those funds were used and under what conditions. Then she looked up and asked carefully if someone was trying to cut me out of my children's lives. I told her what Lauren had said. I said it slowly, without trying to soften it. I told her about the suitcase, about the words worthless and taking the kids, about the way Lauren spoke as if I were already gone. Melissa listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back and folded her hands. She said that words said in anger were one thing, but there was a pattern here. She asked if there had been other signs of her trying to push me aside as a parent. I told her about the school events I had not been told about, the way Lauren talked about me to other parents, the stories that had reached me through strangers' mouths. I told her about Ben asking if I was moving out. She took notes. Her handwriting was small and precise. She said quietly that if Lauren planned to pursue full custody, she would need to present a story where I was unfit or absent. She said Lauren had already started building that story socially. Then she asked what I wanted. The question caught me. For months, maybe years, I had been reacting to what other people wanted. My boss wanted numbers cleaned up. Lauren wanted a certain lifestyle. The kids wanted peace. I had never really asked myself what I wanted beyond keeping everyone from fighting. I told Melissa I wanted to stay in my children's lives as their father, not as a visitor someone allowed to stop by. I said I wanted my kids to know I had not walked away. I said I wanted them to be taken care of without Lauren using their future as a weapon. She nodded slowly and said those were clear goals. She then asked about my job loss. I slid over the termination paperwork. She scanned it and made a small noise when she reached the part about restructuring. She asked a few questions about timing, about when the new hires had appeared, about any conversations I had overheard. I told her everything I could remember. The board with legacy roles, the whispered talks about fresh blood, the remark about 3 junior staff doing my job. She tapped the paper and said there might be more to do on that front later. For now, she wanted me to focus on the trust, the kids, and my position in the family. She said we could handle the employment part separately if needed. By the end of the meeting, we had not filed anything. There were no dramatic moves. She simply laid out a path. She talked about documenting Lauren's statements, gathering messages, building a timeline. She mentioned the possibility of a custody arrangement that recognized my role. She said the trust documents gave us leverage, especially if Lauren tried to cut me off while expecting access to those funds. As I left, she said one last thing. She said quiet men often thought they had to accept whatever was thrown at them. She said the law existed, in part, for people like me, people who played by the rules and then got pushed aside anyway. She said I was not as small as I felt. The next stop was the bank. Sitting in the office with a young advisor in a crisp shirt, I asked basic questions. I confirmed that the kids' education accounts were linked to the trust. I made sure my contact information was up to date, and Lauren's role was what I thought it was. It turned out she did not have independent authority over those funds. That knowledge settled in my chest like a small stone of calm. Back at the house, Lauren's car was in the driveway. I walked in and heard voices in the kitchen. Nora and Ben were at the table, half-finished sandwiches in front of them. Lauren stood by the counter with her phone, talking to someone from her family. She was describing me as unstable and irresponsible. When she saw me, she ended the call quickly. She asked in a bright tone how my little meeting had gone. I said it had gone fine. I did not give details. I sat with the kids, asked about their day. Nora answered, but she kept glancing at her mother as if checking for permission. Ben asked if things were okay now. I told him we were working on it. Lauren gave a short laugh and said we were working on a new arrangement that would be healthier for everyone. She said in front of the kids that moving in with her sister had been good for them, that they seemed calmer away from tension. She talked as if I created that tension by existing. I did not argue. I watched the kids' faces instead. Nora looked down at her plate. Ben fidgeted with his napkin. I realized that every word Lauren spoke in front of them was a small brick in a wall she was building between us. After lunch, Lauren said there was a church event coming up, a little family night in the community hall. She said her sister's family would be there, and most of the people we knew. She added in a careful tone that it might be good for everyone if I skipped it, so there would not be any awkwardness. I said I had heard the event announced last Sunday and that I planned to be there. For the first time that day, she looked truly surprised. She reminded me that things were delicate. She said people talked. She said the kids did not need to see us disagree in public. I said calmly that the kids also did not need to see their father vanish from gatherings as if he did not exist. I told her I would be there, quietly, and I expected to spend time with my children. She stared at me for a long second, then shrugged and said I would do what I wanted anyway. She said if I embarrassed myself, that was on me. She started cleaning up plates a little harder than necessary. The sound of dishes clinking filled the kitchen. I went back to my small office and closed the door. I sat at the desk and looked at the stacks of papers Melissa had helped me organize. Work, trust, family. I did not know exactly how everything would play out, but I knew one thing clearly. The next time Lauren tried to present a story about who I was in front of other people, I would not be standing there empty-handed. On my phone, the church calendar app pinged with a reminder for the family night. The event was 3 days away. I looked at the blinking notification and understood something simple. That hall, with its folding chairs and bad coffee, had been the place where I first heard I was replaceable. It was also going to be the place where I stopped letting other people write my role for me. The 3 days before the church event felt like a hallway. Long, narrow, no windows, but I kept walking anyway. The morning after I told Lauren I would be at the family night, I called Melissa's office again. Her assistant slotted me in for a follow-up. I drove downtown with my briefcase on the passenger seat, the trust folder on top like a weight. The city moved around me as if nothing was happening. People waited at bus stops, checked their phones, drank coffee. My world felt like it had tilted, but the traffic lights stayed the same. In Melissa's office, things were simple. Paper, pens, straight lines. She had already reviewed more of the trust documents. She said she had some suggestions for how to protect my role in the kids' lives. She used words like structure, petition, temporary orders. She laid out options in clear, calm language. None of it sounded like revenge. All of it sounded like boundaries. She asked again what I wanted out of all this. I gave the same answer, but this time it felt more solid in my mouth. I said I wanted to stay their father in every way that counted. I said I wanted decisions about their education and future made with both parents in mind, not just one. I said I did not want the money my grandfather left to be used as leverage against me. She listened and then slid a small stack of papers across the table. She said these were preliminary steps, nothing final, nothing dramatic. She explained each one in plain words. Protection, notice, documentation. She said there was no need to rush into a courtroom yet, but there was also no reason to sit with my hands in my lap while someone else built their story. I read each page slowly. The sentences were stiff, but clear. They were not weapons, they were fences. When I was done, she asked if I understood. I said I did. My hand did not shake when I picked up the pen. Signing my name felt different this time. For years, I had signed forms other people put in front of me. Mortgage, insurance, job contracts. That morning, I felt like I was finally putting my own name down on my own side. Melissa said there were still more things to gather. She asked about messages from Lauren. texts, voicemails, social media posts, if any. I told her about the comments Lauren had made to friends that came back to me through other people. She said hearsay was messy, but if those people were willing to talk, it could matter. She wrote the word witnesses in her notes. That word made me think of Carla. I went home and walked across the street. Carla was out front, watering the sad winter plants in her little rock bed. She was in her mid-50s, short, with a kind face and sharp eyes. She had heard more in this neighborhood than most people realized. When she saw me, she set down the watering can and asked how I was holding up. I told her things were rough. I asked if we could talk for a minute. We sat on her front steps while the wind moved dead leaves around our feet. I asked her if she remembered that night when Lauren had said she was taking the kids and called me useless. Carla nodded slowly. She remembered. I asked if she would be willing to say what she heard, if it ever mattered. She looked at me for a long second and then said she had been biting her tongue for a while, watching the way Lauren talked about me. She said she did not like bullies, no matter what clothes they wore. She told me if someone needed to hear what she had seen and heard, she would tell them. When I walked back to my house, I noticed Lauren's car was not there. The place felt half empty. I went inside and did what Melissa had told me to do. I scrolled through old messages, saving anything that showed threats, put-downs, or attempts to cut me out. I backed up photos. I wrote a timeline on a yellow notepad. Dates of big arguments, days I was not told about school events, the night of the church fundraiser, the day I lost my job, the exact words Lauren had used. Seeing it all in order was like laying out pieces of a puzzle I had been keeping in a box. In the evenings, when the kids were not with me, the house was too quiet. I found myself opening drawers I had not opened in years. Old report cards, Father's Day cards with crooked letters, a drawing from Nora when she was 5, showing our family as stick figures holding hands. In that picture, Lauren had drawn my stick figure taller than hers. The memory hit hard. Somewhere along the line, she had started shrinking me instead. The day of the church family night arrived gray and cold. I woke before the alarm again. My stomach felt tight, but not sick. It felt like the minutes before a truck left the dock on a complicated route. You cannot control traffic or weather, but you can make sure the load is secured and the directions are clear. I put on a clean shirt, the nicer pair of jeans, the jacket I used for holidays. I took my time shaving. In the mirror, the man looking back at me had lines around his eyes and less hair than before, but he did not look broken. Just tired. Just done with bending. Before I left, I walked into my office and looked at the stacks on the desk. Trust documents, bank records, printed messages, a note from Melissa summarizing our next steps. I did not take the papers with me. It was not time for that yet. But knowing they were there, in order, made me feel less like a man walking into a storm with empty hands. The community hall looked the same as always. Folding chairs, long tables, a stage at one end with a microphone on a stand, a coffee urn on a plastic table by the door. People milled around, chatting, kids weaving between adults. I stood for a moment in the doorway, taking it in. Lauren saw me first. Her expression tightened for a second before she rearranged it into something neutral. Her sister, Marcy, stood beside her, whispering. A few heads turned in my direction. I could tell who had heard a version of our situation by the way their eyes slid off me quickly. Nora and Ben ran up. Nora's face showed relief and worry all at once. Ben just grabbed my arm and started talking about some game they had set up in the back. For a while, I just followed them around the room, helping with small things, listening to their chatter. No one could accuse me of making a scene. I was there, present, calm. Half an hour in, the pastor tapped the microphone. He said a few words about community and support. Then, to my surprise, he announced that Lauren had asked to say something about family resilience. My shoulders tensed. She walked up to the front, her heels clicking on the wooden stage. She spoke in a steady voice about going through transitions and how hard it was when one partner had to make tough choices for the good of the children. She did not say my name, but she did not have to. She talked about needing stability, about protecting kids from stress, about sometimes having to limit contact with negative influences. I watched from the back, arms crossed loosely. A few people nodded along. Others glanced between us. I noticed something else, though. Phones. 2 people at the front had theirs out, screens pointed toward the stage. One was Lauren's sister. The other was a woman from her book club. They were recording. For a second, the old Mark wanted to step forward and defend himself, to explain to everyone, to argue point by point. But another part of me saw something different. Evidence. Patterns. More bricks in the wall Lauren was building, in front of witnesses, in front of a camera. She thought she was stacking them up against me. She did not realize she was also stacking them up in a way that could be measured, described, documented. After she finished, there was polite applause. The pastor said some closing words. People began to drift toward the coffee table and the exit. A small group formed around Lauren and Marcy, offering sympathetic looks and quiet hugs. I did not go near them. I stayed with Nora and Ben, helping them gather their jackets and small prizes from the games. Carla came up beside me and murmured that she had heard every word. She shook her head and said quietly that some people loved an audience. She patted my arm once and walked away. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a hand on my back, steadying. On the drive home, the kids were talkative and tired. Nora asked cautiously if things were still bad. I told her there were grown-up problems that we were working through, but there was one thing that was not changing. I said I was her dad, and I was not going anywhere. She looked at me for a long moment in the rearview mirror, then nodded. Ben had fallen asleep with a half-eaten cookie in his hand. I dropped them at Lauren's sister's house. Lauren stood on the porch, arms folded. She asked in a cool voice if I had enjoyed the show. I told her I had listened carefully. I said other people had too. She narrowed her eyes, like she was trying to hear something in my tone and could not. She said we needed to talk about next steps. She suggested we meet somewhere neutral in a few days, somewhere public, so things did not get heated. I said that sounded fine. She mentioned the diner downtown, the one I had wandered into after losing my job. She said we could meet there on Friday evening, or she added that Marcy and her husband might come too, to support her. She gave a thin smile and said it would be easier to get me to understand what needed to happen if there were witnesses. I agreed. I said witnesses were always good. On Friday, I left the house with my briefcase in my hand. The trust documents and notes stayed at home. In the case, I only put a small, neat folder and my phone. The air was cold enough to sting. Streetlights were just starting to blink on. When I pushed open the door to the diner, the bell above it jingled. The same smell of coffee and frying oil wrapped around me. At a corner booth, I saw Lauren, her sister, and Marcy's husband already seated. Their phones were on the table, screens face up, cameras a swipe away. A couple of other regulars sat at the counter, including Henry, who turned on his stool when he heard the bell. Every person I needed in one room. Every eye about to turn toward the same conversation. I walked toward the booth, feeling every step.